Close your eyes. Let your body settle. Let your hands rest open. Let your shoulders drop. You have been here before, in this story, in this world, and you know what to listen for. The bell. The sound of impermanence. The particular quality of the Heike's voice as it tells you what happened next. In the first part, we heard of the ascent, the Taira rising, rank by rank, year by year, to the summit of everything. The court of Heian in its final flowering, Kiyomori at his height, the child emperor on his throne, the bell still ringing. Now the descent begins, not slowly, not with the gradual, gentle fading that the word descent might suggest, but with the particular speed of things that have been held at height by force of will and fall, when the will gives out, with the momentum of everything that was held too long. The armies are moving, from the east, from the north, from the mountains. The warriors of the Minamoto are coming toward the sea where the Taira wait. This is the second part. Rest now, and listen. Minamoto no Yoshinaka, the man who came first, before Yoritomo, before Yoshitsune, the cousin from the mountains of Shinano province, who had grown up in the rough country far from the capital, and who arrived in Kyoto in the summer of 1183, like something the capital had never quite seen before. He was a mountain warrior, not the polished, court-adjacent kind of warrior that the Taira had become, not a man who could compose a poem alongside his military service, but someone formed entirely by the landscape he had come from, the steep valleys and the deep snow, the self-sufficiency of people who live far from the centers of power, and have developed their own particular culture of directness and endurance. He had defeated the Taira at Kurikara Pass, one of the most decisive engagements of the war, driving the Taira army into a ravine from which it did not recover. The story says he herded oxen with torches tied to their horns into the Taira camp at night, the panicked animals crashing through the darkness, fire and hooves and chaos, and the Taira, who had never fought an opponent willing to use this kind of strategy, broke and fled, and fell into the gorge below. Whether this is exactly what happened is the kind of question that history cannot answer with confidence, but the result is not in question. The Taira lost at Kurikara. They lost badly, and the loss opened the road to Kyoto. Yoshinaka walked it, and the capital, the elegant, perfumed, poem-composing capital, received him with the particular anxiety of a world that knew the rough thing was coming in, and did not know what it would do when it arrived. The problem with Yoshinaka was not his courage. His courage was not in question. The problem was that he did not know how to be in Kyoto, how to hold the city that his victory had given him, how to manage the relationship between the military power he had and the political structure of the court that the city contained. His soldiers caused trouble, men from the mountains, far from home, in a city whose wealth and refinement they had never encountered. The markets and the mansions, the goods from the continent, the accumulation of beautiful things that the capital had been gathering for 4 centuries, they took what they wanted. The court complained. Go Shirakawa complained. The temples complained. Yoshinaka could not control what he had brought into the city. He tried to manage the political situation the only way he knew, with force. When Go Shirakawa moved against him, when the retired emperor, the great survivor, the man who had managed every political opponent he had ever faced, began organizing the removal of Yoshinaka and his replacement with Yoritomo's forces, Yoshinaka responded by surrounding the palace and taking the retired emperor under what amounted to house arrest. This was the wrong move, not because it was ineffective, it worked temporarily, but because it placed him in the position that Kiyomori had occupied, the warrior who had laid hands on the sacred, who had seized what was not his to seize, who had crossed the line that the world he was trying to govern could not forgive. He had won the city, he was losing the city, and from the east, Yoritomo's forces were coming, led by his brothers Yoshitsune and Noriori, coming to take from Yoshinaka what Yoshinaka could not hold. Among the warriors who rode with Yoshinaka, there was one whose name the tale preserves with particular care, Tomoe Gozen. The tale describes her. She was especially beautiful, with white skin and long hair and charming features. She was also a remarkably strong archer, and as a swordswoman she was a warrior worth 1,000, ready to confront a demon or a god, mounted or on foot. She handled unbroken horses with superb skill. She rode unscathed down perilous descents. Whenever a battle was imminent, Yoshinaka sent her out as his first captain, equipped with strong armor, an oversized sword, and a mighty bow. She performed more deeds of valor than any of his other warriors. This is how the Heike describes her. Whether she was a historical figure exactly as described, whether a woman fought at the battles the tale assigns her to, is uncertain, but the Heike's inclusion of her is not uncertain. She is there, fully present, given her own description, her own deeds, in the story of Yoshinaka's campaign. She rode with him, she fought beside him. When the end came, when Yoshinaka was surrounded at the Battle of Awazu in the winter of 1184, she was there. The tale says he told her to go, that he did not want her to die beside him, that he wanted her to live and carry the memory of his name. Whether she obeyed or resisted, whether she went or stayed, the versions differ. What does not differ? That she was the warrior the Heike chose to give a woman's face to war, to show that the courage the story was describing was not the property of men alone. Yoshinaka died at Awazu in the first month of 1184, winter, the lake of Biwa frozen at the edges, the reeds along the shore brittle in the cold. The forces of Yoshitsune and Noriori caught him. He had only a handful of men left. The battles of the previous weeks had stripped away the army that had been formidable enough to take Kyoto, defeat by defeat, defection by defection, until what remained was Yoshinaka himself and the small group of warriors who had stayed with him to the end. He was riding hard across the marshy ground near the lake when an arrow found him, struck him in the face through the visor of his helmet, and his horse stumbled into the muddy ground along the water's edge and could not rise. He died there, alone, or nearly alone, in the winter mud near the lake that had been visible from the monastery on Hiei all his life. He was 30 years old. The Heike does not spend a great deal of time mourning Yoshinaka. He had caused too much trouble, hurt too many people, made too many enemies, but it does not dismiss him either. He was brave. He was a genuine warrior. He understood the kind of fighting he had grown up with. What he could not understand What he was never given the time to learn was the kind of fighting that the capital required, the slow, patient, multi-dimensional contest of politics and ceremony, and the management of power in a world whose rules he had not been born to. He came from the mountains. He stayed a mountain man, and the city that he took did not become his, because taking a city and holding it are different skills. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the name that the second part of the Heike belongs to, the general whose brilliance drove every engagement from the defeat of Yoshinaka to the final battle at Dan-no-ura, the man who is, alongside Benkei, the most beloved figure in the entire tradition of Japanese military legend. He was 26 years old when the major campaigns began. Small, the sources agree on this if they agree on little else. Slight of frame, not physically imposing in the way that a general was expected to be imposing, but possessed of something that the Heike struggles to name and ends up describing through its effects, a quality of mind that saw the battlefield differently from everyone else, that perceived the unexpected angle, the approach that was impossible and therefore undefended, the moment in which the conventional could be abandoned for the unconventional, because the unconventional was what the situation required. He had grown up at Kurama, the mountain temple north of Kyoto, raised among monks after his father's death, after the defeat of the Minamoto at Heiji. The legend says the Tengu trained him, the great mountain spirits, half human, half bird, masters of the martial arts, that he went into the forest at night and learned what the Tengu taught in the mountain darkness. Whether this is true is the wrong question. What it is true about is this: he learned something that no one else learned in the way that he learned it. Where and from whom, and in what darkness? These are the details the legend provides, because the legend knows that the extraordinary requires an extraordinary explanation. After the death of Yoshinaka, the Minamoto turned west. The Taira were at Ichi-no-Tani, a fortified position on the coast near what is now Kobe, where they had established themselves after leaving Kyoto. Ichi-no-Tani, the name means the Valley of the First, a narrow strip of land between the mountains and the sea, the mountains behind, steep and forested, the sea in front, cold and deep, with the Taira fortress pressed against the water, its back to the cliff, protected on every side except the sea. From the sea, they were secure. The Taira navy commanded the water, and from the land approaches, they were defended by walls and earthworks and the natural protection of the terrain. It was a strong position, the kind of position that a competent general could hold for a long time against a conventional attack that required, if it was to be broken, something other than a conventional attack. Yoshitsune looked at it. He considered it. He asked about the terrain. He was told about the cliffs above and behind the fortress. Hiyodori-go, the cliff of the plover, a descent so steep that it was used only by the deer, and considered impassable by any military force. Yoshitsune considered this. He asked, if deer can descend it, can horses? The answer, carefully given, was, perhaps. Yoshitsune decided, yes. The descent at Hiyodori-go. In the second month of 1184, early spring, the plum blossoms just opening, the morning still cold, Yoshitsune led a small force of 70 riders to the top of the cliff above the Taira fortress. He looked down. The cliff dropped away at an angle that the sources describe as nearly vertical. a slope of loose rock and root, and the remnants of last year's undergrowth, falling hundreds of feet to the beach below. The Taira camp was visible from the top. The rooftops of the fortress, the smoke from the cook fires, the movement of men going about the ordinary business of an army in winter quarters. They were not looking up. They were not looking up because nothing came from above. Nothing could come from above. The cliff was impassable. Everyone knew this. Yoshitsune sent a horse over first. A single horse led to the edge and encouraged forward, and the horse went, scrambling and sliding, finding footing where there seemed to be none, reaching the bottom. The horse survived. Yoshitsune looked at his men. He went over the edge. The descent that followed, 70 horses and their riders coming down the impossible cliff, is one of the most vivid passages in the Heike. The chaos of it, the horses' hooves searching for purchase on the loose stone, the riders gripping with everything they had, the slide and the catch and the slide again, the sound of it reaching the Taira camp below before the sight did, and then the sight, the warriors emerging from the base of the cliff that was supposed to protect them, coming from the direction from which nothing was supposed to come. The Taira broke. Not immediately. They were still warriors, and they fought. But the psychological shock of the impossible happening was not something that courage alone could overcome. The fortress at Ichi-no-Tani fell. In the chaos of the retreat from Ichi-no-Tani, the Taira fleeing to their ships, the Minamoto pursuing, a warrior named Kumagai Naozani rode into the surf after a single figure he had seen heading for the boats. He called out, "It is shameful for a warrior to show his back to an enemy. Turn back." The figure turned. He was young, 16 years old, the same age as Kumagai's own son, with the face of someone who had not yet grown into what war was asking of him, who still had about him the quality of the court, the careful grooming, the faint presence of the perfume that the Heian warrior aristocrats wore even into battle. Kumagai wrestled him from his horse. He raised his visor to take his head, and stopped. The boy's face, too young, too beautiful, too much like what Kumagai loved in his own son. He tried to let him go. He looked up and saw other Minamoto warriors coming, too many, too close, and understood that there was no escape for either of them from what the situation required. He took the boy's head. Afterward, he found in the boy's possession a flute, a beautiful instrument carried into battle, and understood from it what he had killed. A young man of the Taira who had played music on the morning of the battle that ended his life, who had brought to the war the things of the world he was fighting to defend. His name was Atsumori. He was the nephew of Kiyomori. He was 16 years old. Kumagai became a monk. He could not remain in the world that had required this of him. After Ichi-no-Tani, the Taira retreated to the sea, not destroyed, not finished, but broken at the fortress they had held, and pushed back to the element they understood best, the water. They went to Yashima, a flat-topped island in the inland sea off the coast of Shikoku, what is now the eastern edge of Takamatsu, where they built a new base and established what amounted to a court in exile, the child emperor still with them, the sacred regalia still in their possession, the form of imperial government maintained even as the substance of it had long since moved to the east. The year between Ichi-no-Tani and Yashima was a year of waiting, of the Taira holding the sea and the Minamoto unable to take it, lacking the naval capability to pursue them where they were strongest. Yoritomo in Kamakura was building his new order. The administrative structures, the loyalties, the political architecture of the warrior government that would govern Japan for the next century. He was not in the west, he was in the east. He sent his brothers, and his brothers, particularly Yoshitsune, were trying to find a way across the water to where the Taira waited. The waiting has its own quality, in the tale and in history. Both sides knew that what had happened at Ichi-no-Tani had tilted the balance, that the Taira's position was deteriorating, that the regalia and the child emperor were not infinite resources, that the longer the war continued, the less leverage the possession of them provided. The Taira had the sea, the Minamoto had the land, and the question that the year of waiting was asking, which one would determine the outcome? Yoshitsune crossed in a storm. In the second month of 1185, nearly a year after Ichi-no-Tani, he assembled a fleet at Watanabe on the coast, near what is now Osaka, and prepared to sail for Yashima and the Taira. The weather was wrong. The commanders of the fleet, the sailors who knew the sea, who understood the inland sea's particular temperament, told him, "Not yet. The wind is wrong. Wait." Yoshitsune disagreed. The storm, he said, was not a reason to wait. It was a reason to go. A storm means the Taira are not watching. A storm means they have pulled their lookouts in, and their ships are sheltered, and their attention is directed at the water, rather than at the horizon from which the enemy might come. A storm is an opening. They sailed. The crossing that normally took 3 days took a matter of hours, the wind that made it dangerous also making it fast, and Yoshitsune arrived on the coast of Shikoku before the Taira had understood he was coming. He had done this before. At Ichi-no-Tani he had descended the cliff that was impassable. Now he had crossed the sea that was uncrossable. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone paying attention. Yoshitsune did not accept the conventional assessment of what was possible. He looked at the obstacle and found the place where the obstacle was also the path. Yashima, the island fortress of the Taira in exile, where the child emperor lived and the regalia were kept and the form of the court was maintained against all the evidence that the court was what it had been before any of this began. Yoshitsune attacked from the land. The Taira had not expected this. Yashima was an island, and island fortresses are attacked from the water. And the surprise was complete enough to produce the characteristic result of Yoshitsune's tactics. The Taira scrambled for their ships. They went to the water, their element, their refuge, and the battle continued as a naval engagement in the shallows near the shore. It was during this battle, the fighting in the shallows of Yashima, the arrows flying between the ships and the shore, that one of the most famous moments in the entire Heike occurred. A Taira ship moved close to the shore. On the bow of the ship, a long pole had been set up. At the top of the pole, a fan was attached, a red fan with a golden sun, swaying in the sea wind above the water. The meaning was clear, an invitation to shoot it, a challenge, a gesture of the kind that the warrior culture of the period understood as both a test and a form of theater. Show us what you have. On the shore, the Minamoto warriors looked at the fan, They looked at each other. The distance was considerable. The wind was moving the fan. The shot was not impossible, but it was close enough to impossible to make a miss something that would be remembered. A young warrior stepped forward. His name was Nasu no Yoichi. Nasu no Yoichi, a young warrior from the Kanto, not famous before this moment, not distinguished above others, who stepped forward when the challenge of the fan was before the Minamoto and no one else was stepping forward. He rode his horse into the water, the salt water rising around the horse's legs, the animal uncertain on the shifting sea floor, the waves moving against them both. Yoichi steadied himself. He looked at the fan. It was swaying, the red and gold of it catching the light above the dark water, in the wind that came off the inland sea. He prayed. The tale tells us this, that he prayed to the gods of his home province, to the particular deities who had watched over him since he was a child, and asked, "Let this arrow find its mark." Then he drew. The bow bent. The string came back to his ear. He released. The arrow crossed the water in the particular silence that the tale creates around it, the silence of a moment that the story knows is the moment, and struck the fan at the rivet, at the very center, at the point that would have been the hardest to hit, and the fan flew up from the pole, turned in the air, and fell into the sea. Both sides fell silent. Then both sides made noise. The Minamoto cheered. The Taira, even the Taira, beat the sides of their ships with their oar handles and called out their approval, because there is something in a perfect act of skill that transcends the allegiance of the witness. The arrow had found the fan. The fan was in the sea. Yoichi had done it. After Yashima, the Taira had nowhere left that they could hold on land. The island fortress was behind them, taken by a man who had arrived from a direction no island fortress expected. Ahead of them, the open sea, and somewhere to the east, the Minamoto. They gathered at Hikoshima, a small island at the western end of the inland sea, in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu, and they waited, not with the patience of strategy, not as a planned defensive position, but with the particular waiting of people who have run as far as they can run and have arrived at the place where the running ends. The sea behind them, the sea in front of them, the sea all around, the inland sea that the Taira had once commanded, that had been their element, their road, their source of wealth, the water they had built their shrine on, was now the sea that contained them. The water they had loved was the water they were trapped in. Munamori, the son of Kiyomori who had led the family since his father's death, understood what was happening. He was not a bad man. He was not a coward. He was a man who had inherited a position in circumstances that the man who created that position would have handled differently, and who had done what he could do with what he had been given. But he understood now. What remained was not a decision about victory. It was a decision about how to end. Dan-no-ura, the 24th day of the 3rd month of 1185, the strait between Honshu and Kyushu, the narrowest point of the passage between the main islands, where the tides run with a violence that the local people have known for centuries, and that the Taira, who were sailors, knew better than anyone. the Minamoto fleet arrived. On the water, in the morning light, the two fleets facing each other across the channel, the Taira ships holding the western position, the Minamoto ships approaching from the east. The Taira had hundreds of warships. The Minamoto had hundreds. Both sides knew that this was the final engagement, that what happened here would end the war. In the early hours, the Taira had the advantage. The tide ran in their favor, pushing toward the Minamoto, carrying the Taira ships forward with the force of the current, and the Taira archers, who were experienced in exactly this kind of fighting, made good use of the advantage the tide gave them. The Minamoto fell back. The strait was chaos, arrows crossing in both directions, ships maneuvering, men in the water, and the Taira, for a brief morning hour, seemed to be winning the last battle of the war. Then the tide changed. This is how the strait works. The tides here shift multiple times in a day, reversing with a force that reverses the momentum of everything moving on the water. And when the tide shifted, the advantage shifted with it. The current that had been carrying the Taira forward began carrying the Minamoto. The water changed sides. The defection, in the middle of the battle, as the tide shifted and the momentum began to move toward the Minamoto, a Taira ally changed sides. Taguchi Shigeyoshi, a warrior from Shikoku, who had fought with the Taira, and who now, in the moment when the battle was turning, made the calculation that the turning was decisive, crossed the water and joined the Minamoto. He brought something more valuable than his sword. He brought knowledge. He told Yoshitsune which ship carried the emperor, which of the hundreds of vessels in the Taira fleet held the child in whose name the war was being fought, the child whose possession was the Taira's last real card. Yoshitsune directed his archers at that ship. The tale tells another thing here, the thing that would trouble the record and become a subject of debate for centuries afterward, that he ordered his archers to target the sailors, the men at the oars, rather than the warriors. In the warrior code of the period, this was not done. The sailors were not combatants. To target them was to step outside the rules of the contest, to win not by superior fighting, but by removing the ability to fight. Yoshitsune did it anyway. The sailors died. The ships became unmanageable. The Taira fleet could no longer maintain its formations, could no longer respond to what was coming. He had won before. He had won at Ichi-no-Tani by descending the impassable cliff. He had won at Yashima by crossing in a storm. Now he won at Dan-no-ura by doing what was not done. The victory was total. The method was not clean. Both things are true. The Heike does not hide either one. Taira no Tomomori, the fourth son of Kiyomori, the naval commander, the one who had understood the sea and the ships and the particular kind of fighting that the inland sea required. When the battle was clearly lost, when the tide had shifted and the defection had occurred, and the Minamoto arrows were finding their marks in the sailors, and the fleet was breaking apart, Tomomori went to the imperial ship. The tale preserves his words with a particular care. He went through the vessel, from bow to stern, collecting the things that should not be left, sweeping, cleaning, putting in order what could be put in order in the time remaining. When the women aboard asked him what he was doing, what had happened, why he was acting this way, he turned to them and said, with a smile, You are about to see the strangest men from the East. This is the quality the Heike values and returns to again and again. The quality of meeting the end with whatever dignity the moment allows. The ability to act well, to speak clearly, to find the form of what needs to be done and do it. He had lost the battle. He could not have won it. The tide had turned in every sense. He put on 2 suits of armor, weighted himself to ensure he would sink, and went into the sea with his attendant. He had seen everything there was to see. Tokiko, the widow of Kiyomori, Ni-no-ama, the nun of the 2nd rank, who had been there at the beginning of the family's greatness and was here now at the end of it, on the imperial ship in the strait of Dan-no-ura as the battle collapsed around her. The child emperor was 6 years old. He had been emperor since he was 2. He had never known any other life than this one. The moving from place to place, the ships, the formal ceremonies maintained even in exile, the adults around him performing the rituals of a court in increasingly desperate circumstances. He did not fully understand what was happening. He understood that something was very wrong, that the sounds were wrong, that the expressions on the faces around him were wrong, but not what it meant. Tokiko took him in her arms. She wrapped the sacred sword close to the child, the kusanagi, the sword of the imperial regalia, one of the 3 objects whose possession legitimized the emperor, and she spoke to him. The tale preserves what she said. She told him that there was a pure land beneath the waves, that the western sea held a place of paradise, that they were going to a beautiful place. She turned toward the west, the direction of the Pure Land in the Buddhist geography, and she stepped off the ship. The child emperor went into the sea in his grandmother's arms. He was 6 years old. The sword went with him. The sacred sword, one of the 3 treasures that had defined the imperial institution, was lost in the strait. It has never been recovered. After the battle, the sea at Dan-no-ura held everything that the Taira had been. The ships drifted. The armor floated. The robes of the court, the silk and the brocade that the Taira had worn even in exile, maintaining the forms of the civilization they had carried with them, moved on the surface of the water with the particular weightlessness of things that have been let go. The Minamoto warriors moved through it, through the wreckage and the stillness, through the aftermath of what had been, an hour before, a battle. Some of the Taira were captured. Munamori, the leader, the son of Kiyomori who had commanded what could not be saved, was taken alive, pulled from the water before he could complete what the water was being asked to complete. He would be executed months later in Kyoto, the final administrative act of a war that had already found its real ending here in the strait. The Kenreimon-in, Tokiko, the daughter of Kiyomori, the mother of the drowned emperor, was pulled from the sea before she drowned. She had gone in. She had intended to go where her son had gone, where her mother-in-law had gone. The sea did not take her. She would live, for decades, in a small hermitage outside Kyoto, in the place called Jakko-in, among the mountains of Ohara, the last survivor of what the Heike had been, the witness whose witnessing the tale saves for last. The sacred sword, the Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting sword, one of the 3 treasures that constituted the imperial regalia of Japan, the objects whose possession legitimized the emperor as the emperor. The sword went into the sea with the child emperor and the woman who carried him. It has never been recovered. This is not a metaphor. The sword is gone, physically gone, in the strait of Dan-no-ura, at the bottom of the water between Honshu and Kyushu, somewhere in the currents that have moved over it for 800 years. The mirror was recovered, thrown into the sea, but found floating. The jewel was recovered, captured with the ships. The sword was not. The imperial regalia today, the sacred objects that are part of the Japanese imperial ceremony, include the sword, but the sword that is part of the regalia is not the original. The original is in the strait, or what remains of it, what 8 centuries of salt water has left of the blade, and the hilt is in the strait. The Heike carries this loss without quite naming it as a loss, without quite saying, the empire was broken here, something was taken that cannot be replaced, but it is there, in the story, the thing that went into the water and did not come back, the gap in the regalia that the ceremony works around, because what was lost cannot be unlost. The sword is in the sea. The sea keeps it. The tide moves over it as it moves over everything that has been given to the water, impermanently, endlessly, with the particular patience of things that are not troubled by time. Jakko-in, the small temple in the mountains of Ohara, north of Kyoto, in the valley where the hills hold the cold air in the morning, and the sound of water is always present, where the Kenreimon-in lived out her years after the sea at Dan-no-ura declined to take her. She was 29 years old when the battle was fought. She had been the daughter of the most powerful man in Japan, the wife of an emperor, the mother of an emperor, the highest-ranking woman in the country, the Kenreimon-in, the lady of the Gate of Health, in the world that the Heike had made. Now she was a nun in a small hermitage in the mountains. The Heike ends with her, not with the battle, not with the victory of the Minamoto, not with Yoritomo's triumph, or the establishment of the shogunate. The tale ends with the Kenreimon-in, with the surviving witness, the woman who had seen everything, who had been at the center of everything, living in the mountain hermitage, praying for the souls of the people she had loved and lost. Go Shirakawa visited her. The old man, the impossible survivor, the retired emperor who had outlasted everything, came to Ohara and spoke with her. The tale says she recounted everything that had happened, everything she had seen, the story of the Heike from the inside, from the perspective of the woman who had been its highest-placed witness. And then the years passed, and she prayed, and the mountains were quiet, and the water ran through the valley, and the cherry blossoms came and went, and the deer moved through the trees, and she prayed. What do the battles of the Heike tell us? Not just about the 12th century, not just about the warriors and the tactics and the particular geography of the inland sea, but about something that the Heike was trying to understand and has been helping its listeners understand for 800 years. The battles tell us about the nature of courage, not the simple kind, the kind that walks into danger because it does not fully appreciate what danger is, but the complex kind, the courage of Kumagai, who wept for the boy he killed, the courage of Tomomori, who swept the ship before he drowned, the courage of the Kenreimon-in, who went into the water and came out, and had to live with having come out. The battles tell us about the relationship between skill and outcome. Yoshitsune was brilliant. His tactics were extraordinary. He descended the impossible cliff. He crossed the storm sea. He found the opening that no one else found. And he won. But winning the battles did not make him what he wanted to be. It made him a threat to the brother who needed to consolidate power, who needed the victory to be his and not Yoshitsune's. Skill and outcome are not the same thing. Winning a battle and winning a war are not the same thing. And winning a war and getting what you wanted from it, that is the hardest gap of all. The battles tell us about loss, about the young man playing his flute on the morning of his death, about the fan struck by the arrow and falling into the sea, about the sword in the water that has never been recovered. Loss is the subject the Heike returns to again and again, not as complaint, not as accusation, but as the honest accounting of what the world contains. Yoshitsune. After Dan-no-ura, after the victory that ended the war, Yoshitsune returned to Kyoto as the general who had done what the war required. He had defeated Yoshinaka. He had taken Ichi-no-Tani. He had crossed to Yashima. He had won at Dan-no-ura. He was the most celebrated warrior in Japan. And Yoritomo turned against him. The reasons are not simple. The Heike is careful about this, careful not to present Yoritomo as simply the villain, and Yoshitsune as simply the victim, because the political reality was not simple. Yoshitsune had accepted rewards and honors from Go-Shirakawa without Yoritomo's permission, had operated with an independence that the structure of the Minamoto authority did not permit. He was too popular, too brilliant, too celebrated, a general who is loved by the people he has defeated and by the people he has fought for, who the court wants to honor and the public wants to celebrate, is a threat to the brother who holds the administrative power but not the charisma. Yoritomo declared him an enemy, not publicly, not with the dramatic gesture of formal accusation, but with the quiet, bureaucratic lethality of a man who understood power as an administrative matter, stripping Yoshitsune's allies, blocking his resources, making it impossible for him to operate in the world that Yoritomo controlled. Yoshitsune fled, with Benkei, with a small group of loyal followers, into the north, toward the same end that the first part of the story had told us was coming from the very beginning. The Genpei War, 5 years, from the summer of 1180 to the spring of 1185, during which the country that had been organized around the Heian court reorganized itself around the reality of military power. 5 years is not long. In the history of wars, in the accounting of the time that human conflict takes from the people who live through it, 5 years is brief. But the transformation that those 5 years produced was not brief. The world that existed at the beginning of the war, the world of the Heian court, of the poetry and the ceremony, of the aristocracy that had governed Japan for 4 centuries, that world did not fully survive. What came after was different, not the absence of the court. The court continued, the imperial institution continued, the poetry and the ceremony continued, but as something else, as the formal structure within which the real power operated. The real power had moved to the warriors, to Kamakura, to the east. And it would stay there, in one form or another, in one city or another, for the next 700 years. The Genpei War was the hinge on which Japanese history turned. before the court, after the warriors. The Heike tells the story of the hinge, the moment of turning, from the perspective of the side that turned away from. This is why the Heike is a lament as much as it is a chronicle. It knows what was lost. It keeps the knowledge of what was lost alive in the telling. The inland sea, the body of water that was the stage of the second part of the Heike, that the Taira fled across, that Yoshitsune crossed in a storm, that held the island of Yashima, that received the Taira at Dan-no-ura, is still there. If you take the train along the Sanyo coast today, the line that runs between Osaka and Hiroshima with the sea visible from the window, you are moving through the landscape of this story. The islands that the Taira fleet moved between are still there, smaller than you might imagine, covered in green, sitting in the water with the particular stillness of islands that have been exactly where they are for longer than anyone has been recording them. The water is the same water, not the same molecules. The water of the inland sea moves and cycles, and is not the specific water that was here in 1185, but the same body, the same enclosed sea, the same islands, and the same tides, and the same light in the morning on the surface. The fan that Nasu no Yoichi shot fell into water that is part of this water. The emperor and his grandmother went into water that is part of this water. The sword is in water that is part of this water. The inland sea keeps what it has received. It does not return things, not the sword, not the people, but it keeps the quality of having received them, the particular weight of what has been given to it. The water that carries this weight is the same water that the fishing boats cross in the morning, and the ferries cross in the afternoon, and the tourist ships cross in the season of the maples. The same water, the same weight, the same tide running through the strait where the battle ended. The warriors of the Heike operated within a code, an unwritten, evolving code that governed what was permitted and what was not in the conduct of war. The code was not yet the fully articulated Bushido of later centuries that would come later, codified and refined in the more settled world of the Tokugawa period, but it was the beginning of it, the set of values and practices that defined what a warrior was and was not. Announce yourself before fighting. The Heike's battles are full of this. The warrior who rides forward and declares his name and his lineage and his right to be taken seriously as an opponent before engaging. Kumagai calls out to Atsumori, "It is shameful to show your back. Turn." Yoichi is called forward to take the shot at the fan. The announcements, the challenges, the formal structure of individual combat, these are not simply ceremony. They are the expression of a code that believed that fighting was a relationship between specific people, that the enemy was also a person, that the way you fought said something essential about who you were. Yoshitsune violated this code at Dan-no-ura by targeting the sailors, the non-combatants. He broke the rules of the contest he was winning. The tale notes this, does not excuse it, does not condemn it entirely. He won. The sailors died. The Taira fleet collapsed. The code existed. He broke it. Both things are true, and the Heike holds both things without resolving them into a simple judgment, because the Heike knows that the world in which the code is followed, and the world in which wars are won, are not always the same world. Among the Taira, who died in the battles of the second part, one stands out for the particular quality of what the Heike chose to remember about him, Taira no Tadanori. He was a warrior. He was also a poet, a serious poet, a student of the great master Fujiwara no Shunzei, whose school of poetry was the most influential of the period. The night before the Taira left Kyoto, the night of the departure that would become the flight, Tadanori went to Shunzei's house. He carried a scroll. On the scroll were his poems, the poems he had written over years of study, and he asked Shunzei if any of these are worthy, include them in the next imperial anthology, even if you use them anonymously, even if you cannot give my name because the times make it impossible to honor a Taira. Put the poem in, even without the name. Shunzei wept, the tale says. He promised. Tadanori went. He fought at Ichi-no-Tani. He died there. When his body was found, a poem was attached to his quiver, a poem he had written that the Heike considers worthy of preservation, about the traveler spending the night under blossoms at a temple, far from home, a poem about the particular beauty of being nowhere that belongs to you, and finding, in that rootlessness, the same sky that covers every place. Shunzei kept his promise. In the next imperial anthology, one poem by Tadanori appears, without his name, simply a poem by someone whose name cannot be given. The poem survived. The warrior survived in the poem. The name is gone and the poem is there, and this is the form that the Heike understands as the most durable, not the name, not the rank, not the position, but the poem, the 31 syllables, the compressed truth of a moment that the person who lived it found the words for. The Taira became ghosts, not metaphorically, or not only metaphorically, but in the specific sense that the Japanese tradition has always given to the spirits of those who died violently and without resolution, the onryo, the vengeful dead, who return to the places of their death or to the world of the living with the force of unfinished business. The waters of the Strait of Shimonoseki, near Dan-no-ura, are associated with the Taira ghosts. The crabs of the strait, the heikigani, the heike crabs, have shells whose surface appears to show the face of a warrior in anguish. The explanation that has been given, the explanation that the people of the region have told for centuries, is that the souls of the Taira warriors entered the crabs, and that the faces are their faces, preserved in shell. The scientific explanation is that the crabs with shell patterns that resembled human faces were traditionally thrown back by fishermen, while those without were eaten, and so the face pattern crabs survived to reproduce, and their descendants inherited the faces. Both explanations are true. The scientific explanation tells you how the crabs got their faces. The folk explanation tells you what those faces mean, what the people who lived near the strait understood to be present in the water and in the creatures that lived in it. The Taira are in the water. They have been in the water for 8 centuries. They are in the crabs. They are in the stories. They are in the carvings at the shrine of Akama in Shimonoseki, the shrine built for the repose of the drowned emperor, where the priests still perform the ceremonies for the dead who went into the sea at Dan-no-ura. The Heike ends. The Taira do not entirely end. Kamakura, the city on the eastern coast, surrounded on 3 sides by wooded hills, open to the sea on the south, that Yoritomo chose as the seat of his government. Not Kyoto. This was the decisive statement, more decisive in some ways than any battle, that the new power would not be absorbed into the old power city, would not be domesticated by the court it had defeated, would maintain its own geography and its own culture and its own way of understanding what Japan was. Yoritomo established what the Japanese call the bakufu, the tent government, the military administration, at Kamakura. The term tent government carries the memory of its origin, the command tent of the general, the governance that arose from the field rather than from the palace. It was a warrior government, not a court, a government of the people who had won the war by being better at war than the people who had held power before them. This government would last, in one form or another, until 1868. Not Kamakura. The Kamakura shogunate itself would fall in 1333, but the structure, the warrior government, the military administration, the understanding that real power resided in the warriors and not in the court. The court continued, the emperor continued, the ceremonies and the poetry and the seasonal rituals of the Heian aesthetic continued, and continue today, but as the formal dimension of a country whose real governance had moved. Kyoto had the culture, Kamakura had the power, and later Edo, and later Tokyo. The East, always the East, where Yoritomo had waited in exile and Yoshitsune had trained in the mountains, and the warriors had gathered to answer the decree that changed everything. Shizuka Gozen, the Shirabyoshi, the white dancer, who was the beloved of Yoshitsune, who followed him into exile and was captured and brought before Yoritomo at his headquarters in Kamakura. Yoritomo demanded that she dance at the shrine of Tsurugaoka Hachiman, the great warrior shrine of the Minamoto, the tutelary deity of the clan that had just won the war, before Yoritomo himself and his wife Masako and the assembled court of Kamakura. Shizuka was asked to perform. She was the lover of the enemy. She was in the power of the man who had declared that enemy a fugitive. She was asked to perform for the entertainment of the people who had destroyed the life she had been living. She danced, and she sang, and what she sang, in front of Yoritomo, in the shrine of his ancestors, with the entire court of Kamakura watching, was a song of loyalty to Yoshitsune, a love song, a lament, a public declaration that the man she loved was the man she loved, and that no amount of power standing in front of her could change that. Yoritomo was furious. His wife Masako spoke to him. It is natural for a woman to long for her lord. It would be wrong to punish her for this. Have mercy. He relented. Shizuka's life was spared, but the song she sang, the song of loyalty performed in the place that least wanted to hear it, is the thing the Heike preserves about her, not her survival, her song. Hojo Masako, the wife of Yoritomo, the woman who interceded for Shizuka Gozen, is one of the most remarkable figures in the history that surrounds the Heike. She was the daughter of Hojo Tokimasa, a warrior from Izu province, the same province where Yoritomo had spent his exile, and she had married Yoritomo against her father's wishes in the early days of the war. She understood power, not the courtly kind, the kind that expressed itself in ceremony and rank, but the real kind, the kind that came from knowing who owed whom what, from managing relationships across time, from the patient, unglamorous work of building and maintaining the structures within which decisions were made. When Yoritomo died, in 1199 of uncertain causes, Masako did not step back. She became a nun, following the custom of widowhood, and was thereafter known as the Ama Shogun, the nun Shogun. The irony of the title is intentional. She governed, not in her own name, through her son's nominal authority, through the structures of the Hojo clan that would dominate Japanese politics for a century after her. But she governed. The Heike does not tell her story. It ends before her full significance becomes clear, but she is part of the world the Heike made, the world the Heike's battles produced, the world of the Kamakura shogunate, the world of warrior governance. That world was shaped as much by Masako as by anyone else. She is the proof that the warrior world was not exclusively male, that the intelligence and the will and the capacity for power crossed whatever lines the formal structures of the period tried to draw. The battles of the Heike have their own music, not just the Biwa that the blind monks used to carry the story, but the music within the story, the sounds that the tale describes with unusual care, as if it knows that the sonic world of the battles is part of what needs to be preserved. The drums, the war drums of the Heike period, struck to signal the beginning of an engagement, to communicate orders across the noise of battle, to maintain the rhythm of the archer's volleys, are described in the tale with the particular attention of someone who has heard them and understands what they do to the body that hears them, the low, resonant sound that travels through the ground as much as through the air, that is felt in the chest before it is heard in the ears, that changes the quality of the time it occupies. The conch shells, the horagai, the great conch shells blown as signaling instruments whose sound carries across water and across distance with a clarity that the drums cannot match, a high, clear, haunting sound that the warriors recognized as the voice of the war itself. The flute, Atsumori's flute, the one he carried into battle and played, the tale implies, in the morning hours before the fighting began, is the countersound, the music of peace in the place of war, the art of the court surviving into and dying in the world that the court was losing. The drums and the conch shells made the battle. The flute marked what was lost in it. The horses of the Heike are not incidental. They are named. They are described with the same care the tale gives to the warriors. Their color, their character, their particular qualities of speed and endurance, and the willingness to go where they are asked to go. The Heike warrior was inseparable from his horse. The training of the samurai, in this period and for centuries after, included the horse as an extension of the body, the ability to shoot accurately from the saddle, to manage the animal in chaos, to communicate through the reins and the legs what needed to happen in the time available for it to happen. The horse that Yoshitsune sent over the cliff at Hiyodori-go first, testing whether the descent was possible, carried in its willingness to go something of the quality of what followed, the animal's trust in the hand that guided it, its willingness to go somewhere unreasonable, because the unreasonable thing was what was being asked. The famous horse of the Heike, the one whose name the tradition has preserved above all others, is Ikazuki, the great black horse that 2 warriors nearly came to blows over at the crossing of the Uji River, each claiming the right to ride it first into the enemy-held opposite bank. The horse swam the river. Its rider survived. The other warrior, having forced his own horse into the current alongside, also survived. They were both brave. The horse was also brave. The Heike records all 3. The war moved through seasons. This matters, not as a rhetorical device, not as the easy symbolism of autumn meaning decline and spring meaning hope, but as the physical reality of what fighting in the landscape of Japan in the 12th century was like. The winter battles, Awazu, where Yoshinaka died, the frozen edges of the lake, the muddy ground that caught and held the horse's hooves, is a winter battle, with the cold and the light of a season that the Heike describes with the precision of people who know what winter does to the body that fights in it. The spring battle. Dan-no-ura was fought in the 3rd month, early spring, the sea beginning to warm, the light returning to its summer quality, and the plum blossoms may have been visible on the shores of the strait as the battle was fought. Spring in Japan is the season of beginnings, of the new year in the older reckoning, of the return of life, and it is also the season of the cherry blossom falling. The Taira fell in spring. The blossoms were falling. The sword went into the sea with the tide of early spring running through the strait. The Heike does not make these correspondences explicit, does not say, notice how the season echoes the event. It does not need to. The Japanese listeners who heard the Biwa monks sing already knew what the seasons meant. They already carried the seasonal awareness in the way they heard everything. The spring tide running through the strait as the Taira fell, they heard this as it was meant to be heard. The Taira prayed. This is one of the things the Heike makes visible, the religious life of people in extremity, the particular quality of prayer that comes from people who have lost everything except the act of praying. At Yashima, the child emperor performed the ceremonies, the court in exile, wherever it was, on whatever ship, in whatever temporary structure, maintained the imperial rituals, the prayers at the prescribed hours, the offerings to the gods, the maintenance of the sacred forms that the emperor's role required. A child performing the ceremonies of the civilization that was protecting him with increasingly desperate faith in the power of ceremony to protect. The Taira warriors prayed before battle. Not only the Taira, warriors on both sides, but the Heike shows the Taira prayers with the particular care of a story that understands prayer as one of the things human beings do when there is nothing else left. Shigemori had prayed at Kumano, had asked to be taken before he was forced to choose between his father and what was right. Tadanori had prayed before he went to Ichi-no-Tani. The grandmother had prayed on the ship at Dan-no-ura, had turned toward the west, toward the Pure Land, before she stepped off. The Pure Land, the Buddhist paradise, the realm of Amida Buddha in the west, that the Taira invoked in their last moments, is the same Pure Land that the ordinary people of Japan had been invoking for centuries, the place that waited beyond the difficulties of this world, the destination that made the difficulties bearable. They prayed. The sea took them. The prayers went somewhere. Loyalty. the concept that runs through the second part of the Heike like the current, through the strait of Dan-no-ura, always present, always moving, sometimes in the direction you expect and sometimes not. Benki's loyalty to Yoshitsune, the warrior monk who had pledged himself at Gojo Bridge, who had followed his lord through the war and into exile, stands at the barrier at Koromogawa, while Yoshitsune prepares to die with dignity inside. He holds the gate. He fights alone. He takes the arrows. The account says dozens. The account says more. And does not fall. He does not fall because he is dead already, because he has died standing, because the body that has received too many arrows to support life has not yet received the signal to fall. He stands. The warriors of the enemy approach. He stands. They do not dare come closer. He stands. And then they see. He is standing in death, the standing death of Benkei. This is the image of loyalty that Japan has returned to for 800 years. The figure at the gate, standing past the point where standing is possible, because the Lord within needed one more moment. It is not practical. It is not strategic. It has no military value beyond what it already accomplished. But it is what loyalty looks like when it is complete, when there is nothing left to give, and it gives that too. Yoshitsune died at Hiraizumi, in the mountains of the north, in the Tohoku, the deep north of Honshu, where the Fujiwara of Oshu had built their own civilization, their own refined world, apart from and parallel to the Kyoto that was the center of everything else. He had fled there with Benkei and his small band, north, always north, evading the search that Yoritomo had set across the country. The Fujiwara of Oshu had sheltered him, not because they were allies, not because they had a political interest in his survival, but out of the particular honor of the person who provides refuge to the person who needs it, the obligation of shelter that the warrior world understood as real. But Yoritomo's pressure grew. The Fujiwara lord died. His successor calculated that the cost of protecting Yoshitsune had become greater than the honor of protecting him. The betrayal came. The forces of the new Fujiwara lord surrounded the compound at Takadachi, the small fortress at the edge of Hiraizumi, where Yoshitsune had been given refuge. Inside, Yoshitsune understood. He sent his wife and daughter ahead of him, a decision the Heike records without dwelling on, the specific cruelty of what war required and what survival required, being left to the imagination of the listener. Then he composed himself. He performed the last prayers. He was 31 years old. He died at Hiraizumi, in the north, far from the sea where his victories had been won, and the capital where he had been celebrated. Benki stood at the gate. Yoshitsune died within, both of them in the north, both of them at the end. Hiraizumi, the city in the north, in what is now Iwate Prefecture, where the Fujiwara of Oshu had built their own version of the civilization that Kyoto embodied. The Konjikido, the Golden Hall, is still there, built in 1124, before the Heike's events began. A small building, housed now within a larger structure that protects it from the weather. Its interior covered in gold leaf, mother of pearl, lacquerwork of extraordinary refinement, the expression of what the Fujiwara of Oshu had built in the north, the wealth from the gold mines of Tohoku, the craft of the artisans they had attracted, all of it compressed into this small room that still glitters in the subdued light that filters through the outer structure. Yoshitsune came here, to this city, this hall, this expression of the northern civilization that had developed outside the center and had become, in its own way, as beautiful. He came as a fugitive. He was sheltered. He was betrayed. He died. The Golden Hall survived. It survived the betrayal, the battles, the centuries, the fires and the earthquakes, and the slow dissolution of the civilization that had built it. The poet Basho came here 500 years later. He stood where the Fujiwara palaces had been, already ruins by his time, already returned to grass, and he wrote, "The summer grasses, all that remains of the warrior's dreams, Natsu, Gusa, ya, tsu, amono, domo, ga, yume, no, ato." The summer grasses, the warrior's dreams, the place where Yoshitsune died. The Heike is a story of bridges, not only as physical structures, though they are that too, but as the places where the story's most significant meetings and crossings happen, where the movement from one world to another is made physical by the act of crossing the thing between them. Gojo Bridge in Kyoto, where Benkei stood with his 999 swords and met Yoshitsune and became what he would be forever after. The bridge over the Uji River, where Yorimasa and the monks made their stand against the Taira forces sent to capture Prince Mochihito, where the planks were ripped up to slow the crossing, and the warriors swam the river anyway. The bridge at Koromogawa, where Benkei stood in his standing death, holding the gate while Yoshitsune completed what had to be completed. Bridges are where things change. On one side, what was. On the other side, what will be. The crossing is the moment of commitment, the moment of no return, that every bridge asks of the person who crosses it. The Heike is full of crossings, the Taira crossing to the western sea, Yoshitsune crossing in the storm, the grandmother stepping off the ship into the water, all of them crossings, all of them the moment when what was on one side is left behind, and what is on the other side is accepted. The bridges make this literal, the water makes it irrevocable, the Heike makes it beautiful. The children, the war that the second part of the Heike describes, was fought by adults, by warriors in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but its costs were paid by children as well. The child emperor, 6 years old at Dan-no-ura, he had been emperor since he was 2. He had lived his entire conscious life on ships and in exile, in the form of a court that was performing the ceremonies of an institution that was fighting for its survival. He did not choose this. He did not understand it. He was a child dressed in robes and asked to be the sacred center of everything that was falling apart. The children of Yoshitsune. The Heike does not dwell on the daughter that Yoshitsune sent ahead, the child who was at Hiraizumi when the end came, because the Heike is careful about the things that are most painful and closest to the places where pity tips into something the listener cannot hold. But they were there. The children were there. They always are. The young men. Atsumori was 16. The sons of warriors on both sides who died in the battles of the second part, the ones the Heike names and the ones it does not, were young. The war was fought by adults. It was also fought by people who had barely stopped being children. The Heike remembers this. It looks at the boy's face under the raised visor and sees how young he is. It sees the flute. It remembers the age, 16. Hiraizumi, the city in the north, in what is now Iwate Prefecture, where the Fujiwara of Oshu had built their own version of the civilization that Kyoto embodied. The Konjikido, the Golden Hall, is still there, built in 1124 before the Heike's events began. A small building, housed now within a larger structure that protects it from the weather. Its interior covered in gold leaf, mother of pearl, lacquerwork of extraordinary refinement, the expression of what the Fujiwara of Oshu had built in the north, the wealth from the gold mines of Tohoku, the craft of the artisans they had attracted, all of it compressed into this small room that still glitters in the subdued light that filters through the outer structure. Yoshitsune came here, to this city, this hall, this expression of the northern civilization that had developed outside the center and had become, in its own way, as beautiful. He came as a fugitive. He was sheltered. He was betrayed. He died. The Golden Hall survived. It survived the betrayal, the battles, the centuries, the fires and the earthquakes, and the slow dissolution of the civilization that had built it. The poet Basho came here 500 years later. He stood where the Fujiwara palaces had been, already ruins by his time, already returned to grass, and he wrote, "The summer grasses, all that remains of the warrior's dreams, Natsu, Gusa, ya, tsu, amono, domo, ga, yume, no, ato." The summer grasses, the warrior's dreams, the place where Yoshitsune died. The Heike is a story of bridges, not only as physical structures, though they are that too, but as the places where the story's most significant meetings and crossings happen, where the movement from one world to another is made physical by the act of crossing the thing between them. Gojo Bridge in Kyoto, where Benkei stood with his 999 swords and met Yoshitsune and became what he would be forever after. The bridge over the Uji River, where Yorimasa and the monks made their stand against the Taira forces sent to capture Prince Mochihito, where the planks were ripped up to slow the crossing, and the warriors swam the river anyway. The bridge at Koromogawa, where Benkei stood in his standing death, holding the gate while Yoshitsune completed what had to be completed. Bridges are where things change. On one side, what was. On the other side, what will be. The crossing is the moment of commitment, the moment of no return, that every bridge asks of the person who crosses it. The Heike is full of crossings, the Taira crossing to the western sea, Yoshitsune crossing in the storm, the grandmother stepping off the ship into the water, all of them crossings, all of them the moment when what was on one side is left behind, and what is on the other side is accepted. The bridges make this literal, the water makes it irrevocable, the Heike makes it beautiful. The children, the war that the second part of the Heike describes, was fought by adults, by warriors in their 20s and 30s and 40s, but its costs were paid by children as well. The child emperor, 6 years old at Dan-no-ura, he had been emperor since he was 2. He had lived his entire conscious life on ships and in exile, in the form of a court that was performing the ceremonies of an institution that was fighting for its survival. He did not choose this. He did not understand it. He was a child dressed in robes and asked to be the sacred center of everything that was falling apart. The children of Yoshitsune. The Heike does not dwell on the daughter that Yoshitsune sent ahead, the child who was at Hiraizumi when the end came, because the Heike is careful about the things that are most painful, and closest to the places where pity tips into something the listener cannot hold. But they were there. The children were there. They always are. The young men. Atsumori was 16. The sons of warriors on both sides who died in the battles of the second part, the ones the Heike names and the ones it does not, were young. The war was fought by adults. It was also fought by people who had barely stopped being children. The Heike remembers this. It looks at the boy's face under the raised visor and sees how young he is. It sees the flute. It remembers the age. 16. The moon was there at Dan-no-ura. The battle was fought in the day. The accounts place it from mid-morning through the afternoon. But the moon was there in the sense that it is always there, above the daylight, invisible but present, moving through its arc above the battle and the strait and the ships. The night before the battle, the moon would have been visible. The warriors on both sides, on the Taira ships and the Minamoto ships, would have seen it. The child emperor, wherever he was on the ship, with whatever understanding a 6-year-old has of what is about to happen, may have been shown it, may have been held up to see the moon on the last night before the last day. The moon does not take sides. This is what the first part established. This is what the moon over the Rokuhara Gardens, and the moon over the Kamo River, and the moon over the mountain hermitage all say, that there is something above the conflict that is not part of it, that continues regardless of outcome, that will be there after the battle is over and the water is still and the ships are gone. The moon was there at the beginning of the Heike, over the Heian court in its flowering, and it was there at Dan-no-ura, over the sea receiving what the sea received, and it is there now, over wherever you are, moving through its arc, indifferent to outcomes, faithful to its own uninterruptible motion. Look for it. It is always there. What has the second part given us? It has given us the battles, Ichi-no-Tani and Yashima and Dan-no-ura, and the particular quality of the fighting that the Heike preserves, not the mass movements of armies, but the individual moments, the specific people, the particular acts of courage and beauty and grief that the storytellers chose to carry forward into the memory of the culture. It has given us Yoshitsune, the brilliant general, the impossible tactician, the man who descended the cliff and crossed the storm sea and won the war and lost everything that he wanted from the winning. It has given us Tomoe Gozen, the woman who rode with Yoshinaka, worth 1,000 warriors, proof that the courage the second part describes was not the property of men. It has given us Atsumori, the young man with the flute, the beauty of what war costs, when it costs the people who should not have to pay it. It has given us the fan, the shot that both sides stopped to watch, as the reminder that even in the worst of things, the capacity for beauty survives. It has given us the grandmother, Tokiko, the nun of the second rank, stepping off the ship with the child emperor in her arms, turning west toward the Pure Land, making the choice that the sea made possible. It has given us the sword in the water, the loss that cannot be recovered, the thing that went in and did not come back, as the honest accounting of what was permanently taken by the Battle of Dan-no-ura. And it has given us the standing death, Benkei at the gate, standing past the point where standing is possible, as the image of loyalty that Japan has returned to for 8 centuries, the figure who gives everything and then gives that too. water. The second part of the Heike belongs to the water in a way the first part does not. The first part was the court, the land, the city, the gardens, the mountains behind Kyoto. The second part is the sea. The Taira went to the sea when they left Kyoto. They were sea people. The first part established this. And when they lost the land, they went to what they knew. The inland sea in the summer and autumn of 1183, the time between the departure from Kyoto and the battle of Ichi-no-Tani, was a Taira sea. The ships moved through the familiar waters. The islands were known. The currents were understood. The ports where the Taira had collected tribute for decades received them now as exiles, but received them with the knowledge of what they had been. The sea changes things. The same person who is one thing on land is something else on the water, where the ground moves, where the horizon is always present, where the distance between here and elsewhere is measured in the direction of the wind rather than in the length of the road. The Taira on the sea were not the same Taira who had filled the offices of the Heian court. They were older. They were diminished. They were carrying the child emperor and the regalia and the memory of what they had been across the water of the sea that had made them, heading, though they did not know it, toward the strait where the sea would receive everything they had and return nothing. The Biwa Hoshi, who carried the second part of the Heike along the roads of Japan, were performing something that their listeners understood as more than entertainment. The dead needed to be remembered in the Buddhist understanding that shaped the Heike's world and the world of the listeners who received the Heike. The dead who are not remembered are the dead who have not fully passed. They linger. They return. They appear in dreams and at the places of their deaths, and in the lives of the people they were connected to. The Biwa monks were performing a memorial. Every performance, every night in every temple, or mansion, or market square where the Heike was sung, was an act of remembrance for the specific dead that the story named Atsumori, Tomomori, Tadanori, the child emperor, the grandmother, named, remembered. Given the particular form of being in the story, being in the song, that the living culture could hold and carry and pass on. This is what the Biwa monks gave, not just the story, not just the entertainment, but the ongoing act of keeping the dead in the attention of the living, of not letting the sea be the last word, not letting the battle be the final accounting. The arrow hit the fan fell into the sea. The Biwa monk sang it back into the air every night for 200 years. 3 battles, Ichi-no-Tani, Yashima, Dan-no-ura, the 3 battles that the second part of the Heike moves through, each one diminishing the Taira further, each one driving them closer to the water that would receive them, form a kind of sequence that the Heike understands as a progression, not just of military events, but of meaning. At Ichi-no-Tani, the land, the cliff, the fortress, the mountains behind, and the sea in front, the Taira caught between what they had defended and what they were retreating to. Yoshitsune descended what could not be descended. The Taira fled to the ships. The land was lost. At Yashima, the shore, the island fortress, between land and sea, attacked from the unexpected direction. The fan shot from the shore across the water, both sides in the shallows, neither fully on the land, neither fully on the sea. The Taira fled further west. The shore was lost. At Dan-no-ura, the water. No land left, no shore left, only the strait, the narrow water between the islands, and the tide running through it with the indifference of the physical world to the human events occurring on its surface. The tide changed. The Taira went into the sea. The sea kept what it received: land, shore, water, the three losses that are also one loss, the gradual, complete, irreversible movement from the world into the element that receives everything. The landscapes. The second part of the Heike moves through specific places, places that still exist, that can be visited, that carry in their geography the weight of what happened there. Kobe, the modern city on the coast of Hyogo, the great port city of the Kansai region, includes within it the area where Ichi-no-Tani was fought. The cliff of Hyodori-goe is still identifiable, a steep slope in the hills behind the city, though the city has grown up to its base, and the wilderness that Yoshitsune's horses descended is now overlaid with roads and houses. But the shape is there, the geography that made it what it was, the mountains behind, the sea in front, is recognizable in the landscape of the modern city. Takamatsu, the city on the coast of Shikoku, where Yashima has been connected to the mainland by reclamation and bridges. The flat-topped plateau that was the island where the Taira built their last court is still there, still distinctive, still the same shape it was in 1185, when Yoshitsune's small force came out of the night with torches and noise, and chased the Taira off the island and into the sea. Shimonoseki, the city at the western tip of Honshu, where the narrow strait of Dan-no-ura separates Honshu from Kyushu, where the tide still runs with the particular violence that the Heike describes, and the people who live there still know. The Akama Shrine, built for the repose of the drowned emperor, stands on the shore of the strait. On the anniversary of the battle, the ceremonies are performed. 800 years later, still performed, still remembering. The sea at night. There's a particular quality to the sound of the sea when you are listening to it in the dark, when the visual dimension is reduced and what remains is the sound alone, the rhythm of the waves, the particular cadence of water returning, the breath of it, in and out, in and out, that is not quite the same as breathing, but close enough to synchronize with. The Taira heard this sound every night of their exile, on the ships, with the water moving below them and the stars above, on the islands they sheltered at, with the sea surrounding. The sound of the water was the constant of the years of exile. There is something about this sound that the body responds to, that the oldest part of the nervous system recognizes as something familiar, something that preceded the human being and will outlast it. The rhythm of the sea, the breath of the water, not threatening, not the storm sea that Yoshitsune crossed, but the quiet sea, the nighttime sea, the sea at rest between the tides. Let the sea carry you now. The battles are over. The Taira are in the water. The sword is in the strait. The moon is above everything. Let the rhythm of the water, the rhythm the Taira heard in their last years, the rhythm that received them, carry you now into the particular quiet of deep rest, in and out. In and out, the sea breathes, and everything breathes with it. The landscapes. The second part of the Heike moves through specific places, places that still exist, that can be visited, that carry in their geography the weight of what happened there. Kobe, the modern city on the coast of Hyogo, the great port city of the Kansai region, includes within it the area where Ichi-no-Tani was fought. The cliff of Hyodori-goi is still identifiable, a steep slope in the hills behind the city, though the city has grown up to its base, and the wilderness that Yoshitsune Shi's horses descended is now overlaid with roads and houses. But the shape is there, the geography that made it what it was, the mountains behind, the sea in front, is recognizable in the landscape of the modern city. Takamatsu, the city on the coast of Shikoku, where Yashima has been connected to the mainland by reclamation and bridges. The flat-topped plateau that was the island where the Taira built their last court is still there, still distinctive, still the same shape it was in 1185, when Yoshitsune's small force came out of the night with torches and noise and chased the Taira off the island and into the sea. Shimonoseki, the city at the western tip of Honshu, where the narrow strait of Dan-no-ura separates Honshu from Kyushu, where the tide still runs with the particular violence that the Heike describes, and the people who live there still know. The Akama shrine, built for the repose of the drowned emperor, stands on the shore of the strait. On the anniversary of the battle, the ceremonies are performed. 800 years later, still performed, still remembering. The sea at night. There is a particular quality to the sound of the sea when you are listening to it in the dark, when the visual dimension is reduced and what remains is the sound alone, the rhythm of the waves, the particular cadence of water returning, the breath of it, in and out, that is not quite the same as breathing, but close enough to synchronize with. The Taira heard this sound every night of their exile. On the ships, with the water moving below them and the stars above, on the islands they sheltered at, with the sea surrounding, the sound of the water was the constant of the years of exile. There is something about this sound that the body responds to, that the oldest part of the nervous system recognizes as something familiar, something that preceded the human being and will outlast it. The rhythm of the sea, the breath of the water, not threatening, not the storm sea that Yoshitsune crossed, but the quiet sea, the nighttime sea, the sea at rest between the tides. Let the sea carry you now. The battles are over. The Taira are in the water. The sword is in the strait. The moon is above everything. Let the rhythm of the water, the rhythm the Taira heard in their last years, the rhythm that received them, carry you now into the particular quiet of deep rest, in and out, in and out. The sea breathes, and everything breathes with it. The road north, after the victory at Dan-no-ura, after the war was won and the Taira were in the sea, Yoshitsune returned to Kyoto. He had done what he was asked to do. He had done it better than anyone could have imagined. And the road north, the road from Kyoto to the mountains of Tohoku, was the road that the victory prepared for him. Not immediately. There was a period, a brief, difficult period, between the victory and the exile, during which Yoshitsune tried to navigate the political world that his victories had transformed. He accepted honors from Go Shirakawa. He made decisions that Yoritomo had not sanctioned. He was, in the capital, the celebrated general. the one the people called great. And this celebrity was the thing that Yoritomo could not allow to exist independent of his control. The order came, not a formal declaration, not the open act of a man announcing his hostility, but the quiet, effective isolation that made every path close one by one, allies withdrawn, resources cut, positions made untenable. Yoshitsune understood. He gathered what remained, Benkei and the others, the small group of people whose loyalty was to the man and not to the calculation, and he went north, the road north, the mountains, the deep snow of Tohoku, the end that was waiting in the only direction that remained open. The barrier at Ataka, on the road north, somewhere in the province of Kaga, at a checkpoint on the route through the mountains, Yoshitsune and his small band were stopped. They were disguised as monks, Yamabushi, mountain ascetics, collecting donations for the reconstruction of Todaiji, the great temple in Nara that the Taira had burned. It was a good disguise. The reconstruction project was real. Monks on the road were a common sight. The barrier guard was suspicious. He thought one of the figures in the group, small, slight, carrying himself with a quality that did not quite match the role he was playing, looked like the fugitive Yoshitsune. Benkei acted. He turned on Yoshitsune, his lord, the man he had pledged his life to, and berated him. You slow us down. You cause trouble. A servant causing problems for his master on a pilgrimage. What kind of person are you? He struck him. No loyal retainer would strike his lord. The guard knew this, and therefore, this man being struck by the monk could not be a lord. The disguise held. They were allowed through. Afterward, Benkei wept. He had struck his lord. He had done the thing that was, in the code of the warrior, the ultimate violation, had placed his hands on the man he had pledged to protect, in order to protect him. The violation was the protection. The striking was the loyalty, and Yoshitsune understood. He said nothing that needed to be said. They continued north. What Yoritomo built was more durable than what Kiyomori built. This is the uncomfortable truth that the Heike's story implies, that the man who seems, in the emotional logic of the tale, less admirable than his brother, less brilliant, less beloved, built something that lasted. Kiyomori built the Taira ascendancy, a personal achievement, the product of one man's extraordinary drive and capability, that required for its continuance someone of similar quality at the center. Shigemori might have held it. Munamori could not. The structure was too dependent on the person who had made it. When the person was gone, the structure followed. Yoritomo built institutions. The Bakufu, the tent government, was not a personal achievement. It was a system, a set of administrative structures, relationships between vassals and lords, mechanisms for collecting taxes and dispensing justice, and managing the military capacity of the country. It was designed to outlast him. It did. The Kamakura shogunate survived Yoritomo by more than a century. The structure of warrior government that he established, the shogunate, the relationship between the military administration and the imperial court, survived for nearly 7 centuries. He did not have the charisma of Yoshitsune. He did not have the brilliance. He was not the subject of stories and poems and no plays. But he built the world that the stories and poems and no plays were performed in for the next 700 years. This too is a kind of achievement. different from the achievement the Heike celebrates, but real. The stars were there, over every battlefield that the second part describes, over Ichi-no-Tani and Yashima and Dan-no-ura. The stars were there, the same stars that the Heian court had named and written poems about, the same stars that the Biwa monks navigated by, the same stars that are still there tonight, above wherever you are, above whatever is happening in the world below them. The stars do not change, or they change so slowly. The drift of the constellations across the centuries is real but imperceptible in any human lifetime, that for the purposes of the human story, they are the fixed things, the things that hold still, while everything else moves. The warrior culture of the Heike looked at the stars the way all people who spend time outdoors at night learn to look at them, as navigation, as clock, as the particular beauty of the thing that does not change in a world where everything is changing. Before a battle, the warriors would have seen them. After a battle, they would have seen them. The stars do not mark what happened below, do not hold the memory of the specific night in their arrangement, but they were present at every significant moment of the Heike story. They are present now, above this night, above your sleep, above the particular darkness of wherever you are. The stars that were above Dan-no-ura are above you. The same stars, a different night. The long continuity of the sky that holds everything and is troubled by nothing. Rest in it. The sky is large enough. The stars are steady enough. The night is quiet enough. The third part waits. The battles are over. The Taira are in the sea. Yoshitsune is dead in the north. Yoritomo has built the new order in the east. And at Jakko-in, in the mountain valley of Ohara, the Kenreimon-in prays. The third part of this story will give her the ending she was given. The life in the hermitage, the years of prayer, the account she gave to Go Shirakawa when the old man came to visit her and heard, from the last witness, what had happened in the world that both of them had been part of. The third part will also give the larger ending, the meaning that the Heike arrives at after all the battles and all the deaths and all the things that were received by the sea and by the earth and by the silence that follows the noise of war. The meaning is not comfortable. The Heike does not provide a comfortable ending, does not resolve the death of the child emperor into something bearable, does not make the loss of the sword into something recoverable, does not undo what the battles took, but it provides something, a form, a shape, the particular quality of a story that has been fully told, that has not hidden from what it needed to show, and that, in the showing, has honored what it described. The third part will bring the Heike to its end. For now, in the quiet between the second part and the third, rest. Let the sea settle. Let the battlefield go quiet. Let the stars continue their slow turning above everything. The water is still. The tide runs through the strait. The bell rings. In the days after Dan-no-ura, the sea gave back some of what it had taken, not the sword, not the child emperor, not the warriors who had gone in with their armor weighted, who had made sure they would not float. But the bodies of some came to the surface, the armor and the robes, the silk and the brocade of the Taira court, floated on the water of the strait. The Minamoto warriors moved through it. They collected what could be collected. They recorded what could be recorded. The aftermath of a battle is always this: the accounting, the naming of the dead, the gathering of the things that the living need to understand what has occurred. The prisoners were few. Munamori, the leader, the son of Tomomori, had been pulled from the water before he drowned. He was taken east and executed in the 6th month of 1185. A handful of others were captured and held and eventually released or executed according to the calculations of the new order. The women survived. This is one of the facts that the political reality of the period produced, that the women of the Taira were not treated as military enemies and were allowed to live. And the Kenreimon-in is the most significant of these survivors. She was pulled from the water. She was taken to the hermitage at Ohara. She outlived the war by decades. She prayed. She remembered. She witnessed. And the Heike, in giving her the final section, in making her the last voice of the story, honors the witnessing as one of the essential things that the living do for the dead. They remember. They remain. They carry the knowledge of what happened into the time that comes after. The second part of the Heike is harder than the first. The first part was the world before the falling, the beauty of the court, the elegance of the life the Taira made. And the first hints that the falling was coming. The second part is the falling itself. But there is something in the falling that the Heike makes useful for sleep, not despite the difficulty, but because of it. The battles of the second part are complete. They happened. They ended. The sword is in the water. The child is in the water. Yoshitsune is in the north. Benkei stood and fell. All of it is finished. There is a particular rest that comes from the completed thing, from the story that has reached its chapter's end, from the knight that has done what the knight does and is now ready to hand over to the next thing. The second part is done. The battles that happened 800 years ago. The people who fought them are at rest in whatever rest the 8 centuries have provided. The sword is still in the sea. The sea is still in the strait. The tide still runs. And you are here, in your particular night, in whatever darkness surrounds you. And the story has done what it came to do. It has given you somewhere to be, while your body prepares to rest. The second part is over. The third waits. Tonight, the sea, the tide, the stars above the strait. The Genpei War is everywhere in Japan, not always visibly, not always marked with signs and explanations, but present in the landscape and the culture and the names of places in a way that the person who knows the Heike begins to see everywhere they look. Kobe is Ichi-no-Tani. Takamatsu is Yashima. Shimonoseki is Dan-no-ura. The shrine at Tsurugaoka Hachiman in Kamakura, where Shizuka danced, is still one of the most visited sacred sites in Japan. The shrine at Akama in Shimonoseki, built for the drowned emperor, still holds the ceremonies. The temple of Jakko-in in Ohara, the hermitage of the Kenreimon-in, still stands in the mountain valley north of Kyoto. The moss on the stones and the sound of the water, unchanged from what she heard in the years of her long surviving. The crabs of the strait still have their faces. The tide still runs through Dan-no-ura with the violence the Heike describes. The summer grasses grow over the ruins of Hiraizumi. where Basho wept for the warrior's dreams. Japan carries the Heike in its landscape, in the specific geography of the places where the story happened, and the story carries the landscape, the cliff at Hyodori, Goi, the shallows at Yashima, the strait where the tide turns. To know the Heike is to see Japan differently. To see Japan is to understand the Heike more fully. The land and the story hold each other, have held each other for 800 years, in the particular embrace of a place and the account of what happened in it. The bell rings again, the bell that opened the Heike, that said at the beginning all things pass, is ringing now in the quiet of the second part's ending. It rang over the Heian court when the court was at its height. It rang over the battles, over Ichi-no-Tani and Yashima and Dan-no-ura, not heard by the warriors above the noise of arrows and drums and the sea, but ringing, always ringing, in the register that the fighting cannot quite silence. It rang over Hiraizumi where Yoshitsune died, and the summer grasses grew. It rang over Jakko-in, where the Kenreimon-in prayed, and the water ran through the mountain valley. The bell says one thing. It has always said one thing. It will say it again in the third part, and at the end of the third part, and in whatever comes after. Shogyo Mujo. All things are impermanent. Not as a warning, not as a lament, as the truth that the Heike has been holding for 800 years, the truth that is most useful to know in the moments when the world is loudest, when the battles are fiercest, when the tide of the strait is running at its most violent. All things are impermanent. The battles past, the tide past, the noise past, what remained, the bell, the story, the telling, the particular quiet of this moment, this breath, this darkness, this rest that is also passing, also impermanent, also worth being fully present to for exactly that reason. The sea at daybreak, after the long night, after whatever darkness the night brought, the sea at daybreak is one of the most particular and reliable of things. The light comes from the east. First, a gray lightning at the edge of the water, the line between sea and sky, becoming visible before either is fully itself. Then, the specific pink of the horizon before the sun, the color that exists only in that brief window between night and day, when the light is indirect, bounced off what it hasn't yet touched directly. Then, the sun. The warriors of the Heike watched this. On the morning of Dan-no-ura, the 24th day of the third month of 1185, the sun rose over the strait, and the Taira fleet and the Minamoto fleet were already in position, already watching each other across the water, already in the particular state of preparation that is neither peace nor war, but the held breath between them, the same sun that rises now, the same east, the same light coming from the direction that the light always comes from. The day of the battle began like every other day, with the sun rising over the water and the world becoming visible, and ended unlike any day before it, with the Taira in the sea, the sword in the water, the tide running through the emptied strait, the sun that rose on a world that had the Taira set on a world that did not, the same sun, the same rising, a different world beneath it. This is impermanence. This is the bell. This is the Heike. What remains of the Heike's world? More than you might expect. The shrine at Itsukushima, the gate in the water, the shrine buildings along the shore, stands today as it stood when Kiyomori built it. Not exactly the same. It has burned and been rebuilt. The gate has fallen and been replaced, but the same form, the same relationship between the gate and the water and the mountain behind. The boats still go out to it. The deer still walk among the shrine buildings. The tidal flat is revealed at low tide and covered again at high tide. The gate stands in the water as it has stood since the 12th century. The Heike no Kyo, the sutra scrolls, are preserved at Itsukushima with the care that objects of that importance require. Gold and silver on decorated paper, 800 years old, still exquisite, still the most beautiful objects of their kind in the history of Japanese art. The Konjikido at Hiraizumi, the golden hall where Yoshitsune came as a fugitive, still glitters in its protective outer building in the mountains of Iwate. The moss is older, the surrounding landscape is quieter, the winter is the same. The tide at Dan-no-ura still reverses multiple times a day, the same hydrological reality that determined the outcome of the most important naval battle in Japanese history. The water moves. It has always moved. It will keep moving. What the water holds, it holds. What the story holds, it holds. Both of them, faithful keepers of what was given to them. The armor of the Heike warriors, the Oyoroi, the great armor of the Heian and early Kamakura period, was not the sleek, close-fitting armor of later centuries. It was large, it was heavy, it was designed for the mounted archer, for the man on horseback who fought at distance with the bow, and it protected accordingly broad shoulder pieces that extended out beyond the body, layers of lacquered leather laced with silk cords in the colors of the clan. The Taira wore red silk cords on red lacquered armor, the color of the clan, the color that made them visible at distance, on the battlefield and the sea. And when the Taira fleet moved through the inland sea, the red of the armor on the ships was visible from the shore. Tomomori wore 2 suits. When he went into the sea, when he had seen everything there was to see, he wore 2 suits of armor instead of 1, doubled the weight, made sure. The armor that had been the expression of the warrior's identity, the thing that said, I am this clan, this rank, this person, became the thing that carried him down. The armor is in the sea. Along with the sword, along with everything else the battle of Dan-no-ura received, the great Oyoroi of the Taira warriors is somewhere in the strait, dissolved by 8 centuries of salt water into whatever the sea makes of iron and leather and silk over 8 centuries. The color is gone, the silk is gone, the lacquer is gone, but the weight, the specific gravity of the things that carried the Taira down, that remains somehow in the water. The tide at Dan-no-ura changed the battle. This is what the tradition says. This is the shape the story gives to what happened. That the turning of the tide was the turning of the war. That the physical force of the water determined the outcome of the human contest being conducted on its surface. Whether this is exactly true is the kind of question that history and hydrology have been arguing about for a century. Whether the tide actually turned in the middle of the battle, whether the timing was right, whether the accounts can be trusted in their specific details, but the question misses the point. The point is the image, the tide turning, the current that was with you becoming the current against you, the force that was your advantage becoming the thing that costs you. This is the truth the Heike has been telling from the beginning, that the tide turns. For the Taira, it turned at Kurikara, and at Ichi-no-Tani, and at Yashima, and finally, and completely, at Dan-no-ura. It had been turning since Kiyomori crossed the line that could not be uncrossed, since Shigemori died and the moderating voice was gone, since the child emperor was placed on the throne at 2 years old, and the Taira bound themselves to a fate they could not escape. The tide turns. It turned for the Taira. It turns for everything that the opening bell announced it would turn for. And knowing this, carrying this knowledge without despair, is what the Heike offers. Not the comfort of false hope, not the reassurance that it will all work out, but the truth that the tide is part of the story, that the turning is not betrayal, but simply the nature of the water and the moon and the forces that move everything, and that in the full acceptance of this, in the willingness to be what Tomomori was at the last, clear, present, seeing everything there was to see, there is something that the Heike calls dignity and what we might call rest. The tide runs, the bell rings, the story is told, rest well. The second part ends where all things end, in the quiet that comes after. The battles are in the past. The warriors are at rest. The sword is in the water of the strait. Yoshitsune is in the north. The Kenreimon-in is in the mountains. Yoritomo is building his new world in the east. The court continues its ceremonies in Kyoto. The Biwa monks are on the roads between one performance and the next. The world that came after the Heike is already forming. The warrior world, the 700 years of the samurai. And the world that the Heike describes is already becoming what it will be from now on, a story. The most important thing a world can become, not history, or not only history, but the living account of what it was to have been what it was, the court at its height, the family in its glory, the warriors in their courage and their grief, the children who were there and did not choose to be, the sword in the sea, the fan in the sea, the bell ringing over all of it. Rest now. The third part waits, the hermitage, the prayer, the last accounting. Tonight, the sea, the tide, the stars above the strait, the particular piece of things that are finished and at rest. Let the water carry you. Rest well. Sleep well. Good night. New Japanese stories every day on Quiet Tales of Japan. See you again for your next sleep.